about America and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business. And I have chosen you to preach this evangel.
For all my free market healthcare robbing, stock stealing, retirement fund fucking with niggas. Fuck you little credit card scamming, jewelry stealing, crack selling, liquor store robbing motherfuckers. Shout to the homies, Carnegie, OG, Willie Randolph Hearst, Baruch, Rockefeller, the real Rockefeller, my main bitch Leona, pour out a little Louis the 13th. Scott Rothstein, Jack Abramoff, hold your head. My Rothschild niggas, let's get this money. I spend my day pimping America overseas. Pension for the workers, nigga please. Embezzlement, etiquette, private settlement. I'm better with Confederate rhetoric from my mansion in Connecticut. Foreclose of it, close out the tenement. I twist words like a speech impediment. I hope you got good credit, bitch. If not, better get a new job with benefits. While I play golf with niggas and get cheddar with. New money buys brand new carrots. My old money bunch of great grandparents. You got grills in your mouth, I ain't mad at ya. I own every gold mine in South Africa. Thanks, baby, you made me $1 billion. Plus, I own a building for each one of my children's children.
And we are live. Welcome to Voice of Rebellion Radio. This is your host, Chris J. Tonight, Sunday night, the 5th of March, on Voice of Rebellion Radio here at UCY Radio station that's every week glad to be on, and today we're talking the topic that I talk about every time at this time of the year, which is that 4 years ago today, one of the greatest revolutionaries, one of the greatest leaders in the history of the world, and when it comes to South America, one of the most important figures in South American history, a man who rebelled against the United States, Israel. When I say the United States, I'm talking about the United States government. And same thing for the Israel. I'm talking about the Israel government, the Israelis, the many different governments around the world really didn't like him. The United States government, of course, was where we seen really this showdown publicly between the United States government and Venezuela's government. And this is a man who faced a coup attempt, and this man's Hugo Chavez. Remember in 2002 he faced a coup attempt by the right-wing opposition, and his government faced the coup attempt. He faced the coup attempt. Now it's almost been 15 years since the coup attempt on April 11th to April 13th, 2002. And this is where I think a lot of people started to look to Chavez, and people saw how hard that the United States government tried to take him down with the coup attempt that failed. And actually, they temporarily had the oil businessman Pedro Carmona had been sworn in as president of Venezuela. However, his government fell apart in 2 days when Hugo Chavez returned, and he returned with a swarm of about 1 million people that supported him. 1 million Chavistas, I guess you could call them, or maybe just people that didn't that were opposed to the coup. Maybe not all of them were ideologically 100% supportive of him, but definitely they were supporters of him at the moment. And Chavez returned to the palace and retook his spot as his presidency. He had been there since 1999. He was elected in 1998 with so much odds against him, and people had pretty much discarded him as a legitimate candidate, but he actually ended up winning the election in 1998. In 1999, he became the president of Venezuela, ending a long period of the Operation Condor style government that was of Carlos Andrés Perez, and then there was another guy that was before him. I think it was Rafael Cardona. Was the guy that preceded Chavez, and it was years of repression, corruption, and we had these the inequality inside the country had reached very high levels, extreme poverty in the country, and Chavez was the start of things turning around. And he actually had tried to go into power before in 1992 when he did a coup attempt on February 4th, 1992. However, it was a much more popular back than the 2002 coup attempt that was done by the opposition. I think that the people were so sick of the government in 1992 with Carlos Andrés Perez that they would have been pretty happy to see Chavez actually been successful with the coup attempt, and also is that they didn't, a lot of the 2002 coup perpetuators, they ran off like cockroaches. Well, 92 uh, 92 coup, which was led by Hugo Chavez. Hugo Chavez took responsibility for the coup, which he went to prison for 2 years before being released in 1994. Around that time, one of his future, who would become one of his vice presidents, Rangel, he showed evidence of Carlos Andrés Perez's corruption. I guess too undeniable to the point where the Supreme Court had to have accepted, and that brought about the end of Carlos Andrés Perez, bringing about Rafael Cardona. However, that didn't really bring an end to the whole period of Operation Condor. I would say that would ended when Chavez took power, and this happened in the mid-90s. And then at first, Chavez, I wasn't really sure whether he would run or not, but I think he was told by somebody that, well, is that you have to win to the point where they can't deny your victory. And, he had so much support, I guess, to the point that the people in charge of the country didn't want to challenge it, I guess. The elites or whatnot didn't want to challenge, and I say the elites, is also the world elites didn't want to challenge this victory there for the people. And I guess they waited until 2002 to try to reverse what had happened in 1998, but it ultimately failed for them. And the coup attempt did not bring about the reversal of the Chavez era, and Chavez returned to power. Carlos Andrés Perez would end up, after Chavez's election, he would end up going to Miami. That's where he lived his last few years. He died about 7 years ago, in 2010. Rafael Caldera was the guy that succeeded Andrés Perez. He was the guy who was in between those two. But Andrés Perez was definitely, I could say, he was kind of a major figure when it came to the symbol of corruption and what it was in the time of preceding Chavez. He was there from 1974 to 1979. He was the president, and he was in the president again from 1989 to 1993. And let's see. Yeah, so 93. So actually, I think it did precede his being brought about on corruption charges to Chavez's release in 1994, when that was 1993 that Andrés Perez was out of there, and then there was like a transition period, you could say, between the presidencies. And there was Rafael Caldera, actually. An interesting thing about him is that he was president before Andrés Perez's first time, 1969, 1974, and 20 years later, he was the president for 5 years. So just generally, you could say that the whole time before Chavez was kind of like that. Kind of like that. Kind of because you'd be lumped into the Andrés Perez Operation Condor, all of it. By kind of like that, it's all similar to Operation Condor style governments. He also, Rafael Caldera actually died in about 8 years ago, actually a little over 7 years ago, in late 2009. He was actually in Venezuela, when he died. He didn't die in Miami like Andres Perez. Um, but he did pardon Hugo Chavez, which did give it away, I guess, because of the growing popularity. I guess he was pretty much felt like he was forced to, uh, or the people in power felt like they were forced to. And what I think that was more about than anything was that they didn't want, I guess, it's like goes back to the JFK quote: "Those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent one inevitable." So I think they didn't want the latter to happen potentially in the country, like what happened in Cuba, where they had a violent revolution in the 1950s that brought about Castro. That's in many ways Batista and Andres Perez were similar type figures, even though that officially Andres Perez was a democratically elected president, while Batista was an open dictator. But Andres Perez was acted in a dictatorial manner, and during the Carazaco that happened in the late 1980s. This is one of the biggest events in Venezuela, which was kind of like a turning point, I think, because this is where the amount of listlessness of the Venezuelan people, how exhausted the Venezuelan people were by the horrible acts that were being committed by the government. That's where they started to really want to make action. They couldn't take it anymore. It was the straw that broke the camel's back. Was I think was the Carazaco in many ways. Within 9 years of that, Chavez would be elected, and it's something that goes back. It's anything that when people forget what happened in the time before Chavez, that's the thing is just Caracazo is the event. This is one of the things that preceded. This is one of the worst things that happened in Venezuelan history, and during this time, this is February 27th, so we actually just passed the 28th anniversary, and went into March, which was first it started with protests that were there was a violent crackdown by the government, and somewhere between I think some estimates say that 3,000 people were killed by the government during this event. And the protests were about food prices going up. There was an economic crisis going on in the late 1980s inside of Venezuela, and apparently, it led to pretty much people looting in order to, I think, a lot of these people just to survive. And they talk about like the chaotic situation that's supposedly going on now. If you want to look into the chaos, talk about Venezuela, where a lot of this stuff actually happened was back in the late 1980s with Andres Perez, with the people that run the opposition of Venezuela in charge. Pretty much these are guys that successors to that government that ruled in the 1980s and 1990s and was highly unfavored by the end of its time. Andres Perez was highly disliked by the time that he fell out of power, and by 1998, when Chavez came about, it was about time. After so many years, of the same crap by the government there, and it was pretty much the same across South America for a lot of those countries. Is that a lot of the countries that you see nowadays with presidents actually making real progress in their countries in order to fix things, help the poor, and also push sovereignty, push nationalism in their country rather than globalism and the New World Order's plan for South America, which would be leaders like Capriles or whatever, the Venezuelan opposition. Capriles, by the way, is like the main opponent to the current Venezuelan government. Capriles is pretty much just is a poster boy for the for the United States imperialism, and also I'm pretty sure that once he becomes about, is also the Venezuelan stance towards Israel will change and they'll be more favorable to Israel, while Chavez was always throughout his presidency, at least later on. I don't know if he was as I don't think he was as outspoken about the issue when he was first in presidency, but for I know later on he became very outspoken about the massacre of Palestinians that happens over there, this genocide that the Israeli government is committing against the Palestinian people. Hugo Chavez, he even did a speech where he said, "Damn you, state of Israel," and they pretty much of course they tried to make it seem like that the guy was anti-Semitic or something like that. That's one of their favorite things to go to, is that if you don't support the Zionist policies, oh, you must be anti-Semitic. And they said the same thing about Gaddafi. They've said the same thing about various different people that oppose Israel. Various different persons that oppose Israel will say that they're anti-Semitic, they're bigoted. I think a lot of the activists here on, in the activist community have experienced it to at least some point, where we've encountered some of the Zionist trolls on the internet, and they go through simple stuff. It's like off a script, and there's a lot of people that actually get paid to defend the Zionist state of Israel, because that's they do a lot of PR campaign, because their own actual record doesn't. Part of the reason is that their own actual record doesn't stand up on its own, because there's only so much they can hide by the media. But some of that stuff gets out, especially nowadays in the age of the internet and everything. Stuff gets out, and it's not like if if the news on TV says it, then the news on TV doesn't say it, then there's no really big way that it's going to reach a lot of people. Or it used to be like the TVs, the newspapers, a few other ways. Now you got the internet, and the internet's a little bit harder for them to control. So some stuff that's not favorable towards them gets out on the internet. And I'm not saying that they have a lot of influence, and they do. The Israeli government has a lot of control over our media. I mean, from all across the big three networks, they all have to put favorable coverage of Israel, and it all goes back to Operation Mockingbird. Which part of Operation Mockingbird was to make a favorable opinion of Israel, and you see how hardcore some people's stances for pro-Israel have went. You see people that have the bumper stickers or whatever, and they seem like you bring up any criticism towards Israel, towards them, and they're talking about how you are a traitor or whatever. You're they go along with the lines that a real American stands by Israel, and that's one thing that's been vital to the Zionist winning over, I guess, or you could say, or just been vital to turning Americans into hardcore supporters of their terrible regime. Is that they've equated supporting Israel with American patriotism, and that you can't be patriotic if you don't support Israel. And I've had the U.S.'s Liberty Survivors on the show. I've talked about the Lavon affair. There's been quite a few instances where it's like, well, with allies like these, the Israeli alliance is the United States. The Israeli government and the American government, yes, they work hand in hand, but to us, the people of the United States, we're sending our money through taxes and sending it up into the Israelis' hands, and not to our cities, not to so many struggling people in our own country, but they receive $5 billion plus a year over there in Israel of American tax dollars. It's figured out to be like $15 million a day goes to the Israelis. $15 million a day, when you think about it, it's insane. And it's a country that only has 6 million people, and they get $15 million every single day, or which ends up being over $5 billion a year. And they also have all these like packages and extra things that are added up on there. So that like, that adds to the total of how much money they actually receive. If you looked at their net total, it's absolutely crazy. And with the United States, we have our government is, of course, 100% controlled by the elite of the world, the richest of the rich, Rockefellers, the Rothschilds. And then you see when a government like the one of Venezuela revolts against the New World Order, you see how hard they try to take down their government via coups. There was another coup attempt against Maduro in 2015. And much, much more has also happened as well. There's been all kinds of other little sabotage things have happened. There's been the ongoing protest that, there's probably a lot of it. There is some evidence that shows that it's manufactured, and it kind of goes along with the idea of the color revolutions. Like over in Europe, what happened in Ukraine or whatnot. These revolutions set up by these elites, by these people at the top, people like Soros and whatnot. That they have their hand in the color revolutions over there in East Europe, over there in like what happened in Ukraine, what happened in I think something like that happened in Georgia, and I'm talking about the country Georgia, and of course Venezuela. I think was this is kind of another example. This ongoing protests have been happening since 2014. These are not spontaneous, I don't think. And I think because they weren't able to take over after Chavez died, they were hoping that that vacancy would open the way for Capriles to come in. But Maduro was able to win the election, and Maduro has held on to power still. But it started in 2014, so it was only like a year after Chavez's death that the protest started. And yes, I think that definitely Maduro is not as liked by his people as much as Chavez was, but I don't think that all these people that are protesting are legitimate protesters there. And this wouldn't be anything new to say that these are not grassroots protesters. But the protests in Venezuela have been, it's been pretty interesting. And there's been even instances where the right-wing protesters have shot their own people. People that were, it's like there'll be snipers, they'll be shooting at their own people, and so they can later blame it on the government, say that the government had killed these people. There's been a lot of, there's been instances that there's also been there was at one point they said Leopoldo Lopez, the famed leader inside the Venezuelan opposition. There was evidence to show that they were going to pick him off. I think his wife said that his wife was, or somebody said that if the Venezuelan government hadn't got him, then the right-wing opposition would have got him, and they would have killed him and used his death, as like a martyr cry, in order to spark further agitation against the government. But in 2014, there's 43 deaths that were caused by Leopoldo Lopez, which led to him being arrested. Now you see Donald Trump he met with Leopoldo Lopez's wife, and of course it's going along with the lines of, oh yeah, definitely we need we need to support the Venezuelan opposition. Talk about how corrupt the Venezuelan government is or whatnot, or he said it in other times. Trump has continued the same rhetoric against Cuba and Venezuela, and the only thing that people think, everyone says that he's been light on Russia, but Russia, he's the one. He's also said that Russia should return Crimea, which is continuing the same line as the previous government. And I don't think that he's any different. I don't think that he's outside the establishment. Even though that a lot of supporters seem to think that, the evidence, the rhetoric, and the action so far, which is that there hasn't been a real change in policy in Syria, at least that hasn't been publicized, a massive change in the Syrian policy, or that people, at least that Assad, what I'm saying is Assad hasn't said that there hasn't been a massive change of how the United States has been working inside of Syria, and that's one of the major things. That there hasn't been really any, by his actions, by his rhetoric, there's nothing that really says that he's much different than any other puppets. Even though that a lot of people, it's like a lot of people, including myself, wish that he wasn't a puppet, wish that he wasn't the man that he actually is. But he's ultimately won the club. He's one of the billionaires. He's in the big club that we're not in, as George Carlin used to refer it as. And the current situation in Venezuela, is that there's been bigger I think there was some respark in the protest after Leopoldo Lopez was arrested. Actually, that's what started it. Right about that time. That was one of the earlier things that happened. But there was some more highly tense moments in the last year. And also the thing is that the National Assembly, which is like their parliament is now pretty much controlled by the opposition party. They have like a super majority. And despite the fact that like 2 or 3 of the people that got elected in the National Assembly for the opposition were declared to be, they won illegally, but they still ended up seating, and it looked scary. It looked like there was going to be at some point a parliamentary coup, but Maduro's still there. And now that if they're going to do a recall, the only thing that can happen now is that their vice president, who is a Chavista, Tariq al-Assami or something like that, would become the next president of Venezuela. But if Tariq al-Assami became the president, the thing is that the opposition doesn't want that. And some people said that Maduro put him there because it was to discourage a recall vote. I think that he's worthy of it. And, they do that instead of Venezuela. They don't really hang on to vice presidents very long. Like Chavez had like 4 himself. Maduro's had, I think, 3 so far. There was one that he had for the first few years. Then 2016, Aristobullo Usturiz became the vice president. And then early in the year, this year, Tariq al-Assami became the vice president. I'm thinking that, potentially now in 2018 with the election coming up, I think around mid-year next year, is that maybe Diosdado Cabellos might run for the PSUV, which is the ruling party inside of Venezuela, against probably Henrique Capriles. The person that runs, that's at the head of the National Assembly, is Ramos Ayub, I think is how you pronounce his last name. This guy is a leftover of the old, the Andres Perez or whatnot. He's like 70 years old, and I don't think he would run. I think that they're going to pick, the younger face, and the one that, has somewhat of a popularity inside of Venezuela, which would be Henrique Capriles. Even though Henrique Capriles is a total, is a total puppet, and the people of Venezuela actually were to fall for that, there'd be somewhat of a failure, I would think, on the education system that they have in Venezuela. But part of the thing is, well, I can't really say that because the problem is that 60% of the media is still owned by the opposition, and the media, even though uh, the Venezuelan government's in power, most of the media is against, or yeah, 60% of the media is against the Venezuelan government. And you actually had at one point, like around the time of the coup, you had some people on the media calling for the assassination of Hugo Chavez. Imagine if somebody on our media called for the assassination of Donald Trump or something like that. What would be the end result of that? And the protests have been going on now for over 3 years, actually. It started February 12th, 2014, and now we're going on to the fourth year of the protest. And, it seems to be a way of causing, trying to spark some kind of revolution or color revolution is what it is. It's a color revolution attempt. And so far they've been unsuccessful. I don't think they're going to be successful because the people, they might report in their polls or whatever that only 30% of the people are supportive of Maduro or whatnot. But I think that very little or percentage are actually supportive of the opposition. They might not be supportive of either, but they're not going to be supportive of the opposition. They see who the opposition is, and they're just the same clowns that the Venezuela got rid of, just about 20 years ago, when they elected Chavez. Also, a lot of the people that are not supportive of Maduro are still Chavistas, but they just disagree with someone what Maduro does. They don't believe that he's as competent of a leader as Chavez. And I agree with that to an extent. Is that I think that Maduro was, I think that they made a kind of an iffy call by having Maduro kind of be the successor when he ran against Capriles after Chavez's death in April 2013. Instead of made Diosdado Cabellos. And I think that now definitely Diosdado Cabellos is definitely should be the favorite to run against Maduro, or not run against Maduro, Capriles. I'm getting shit confused here now. No, run against Capriles in 2018 was the next election, and they have 6-year terms there. So Chavez died in the first year of his first term, or his fourth term. So that when that happens inside of Venezuela, that means that a special election must be called. If it was after a year, if it's in the second year or whatever of your term, then your vice president gets put in. So since it was only the first year of the term that the special election happened, and despite having been an election just right then in October 2012, that Chavez was elected to his fourth term, Maduro had to face an election to continue the PSUV's rule inside the country in April 2013, which the rule of Maduro is now his term. I mean, he's officially been in power since April 2013. He practically ended up serving the entirety almost of the fourth term of Chavez, and I don't think they're gonna have Maduro, have been there for 12 years or whatever. After if you would to stay all the way to 2024, 11 years Maduro having been there. Chavez was there for 14, 15. Oh yeah, it was going on to his it was on. He had ruled for 14 years. I don't think Maduro has quite that. I don't think he has quite the leadership skills made to rule a country for that long. But then again, you gain some big experience, and Maduro might have, he might have become a better leader since he's been elected. I think that, again, it's that the criticisms that I have with Maduro are, it's minor things. It's not really, as of course, as the opposition side of Venezuela has to say that the dude is a like a murderous tyrant or something like that. No, 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 I don't think anything like that. I think just that some of the ways that he's handled things might have been a little bit better for Chavez, and I think that Diosdado Cabellos was probably the one that was more suited to take that role on, take Chavez's old role, and that's pretty hard to be a Chavez. Like I said, he was one of the greatest leaders in world history. People like to say that he was, here in the United States, and they've been brainwashed by the corporate media here in the United States. They're going to say that the dude was a tyrant. The dude was, the compare. There's been all kinds of. Some people lump him into the same category. I've heard him get lumped in the same category by people as Mao or Stalin. There's a vast difference between Mao, Stalin, and Hugo Chavez, and one of the big differences between, I guess you could, between the Soviet communism or whatever and Hugo Chavez's socialism is that Soviet communism was more international nature, while Hugo Chavez, was more of a nationalist, and also Hugo Chavez was also, he also a very big difference also before people compare is that Hugo Chavez incorporated Christianity into his government, and one of the things of the PSUV, an element inside the PSUV is the Christian left, while the Soviet Union, they made the official state religion atheism. That's a massive difference between the two. And of course, there was no Russian Revolution where there were these crimes that were committed with Red Terror, whatever that happened in the late 19 teens during the Russian Civil War. The comparison between Stalin and Hugo Chavez or whatever is ridiculous. And the people also will say that Stalin died on the same day. He died on March 5th, 1953. Chavez died 60 years to the date later on March 5th. So he died on the same day, March 5th, 2013. But he's he obviously two very, very different leaders, to say the least. And people also like to say that Chavez's policies led to the food crisis happening, whatever, right now. And the food crisis has been overly exaggerated by the media. And another thing about the food crisis and the economic crisis, I should say, economic crisis as a whole inside of Venezuela, is that it's a regional thing. It's not just, if you look at Venezuela's system and you look at Colombia that has a much different system, well, they're also suffering from the regional drought as well. When it comes to the oil prices having dropped down, where you had at one point recently oil being sold at $27 a barrel. One of the things that made Venezuela such a competitive player in the oil market for many years is that when oil prices were very high, they decided to sell them at $50 a barrel. And this is actually one of the things that conflicted with the elites and how they wanted to sell oil. The thing is that oil, being a commodity as it is sold. The prices are set at the Bilderberg Committee. The Bilderberg Committee, makes a lot of these economic markers or whatnot in secret. And the Bilderberg Committee being the highly secretive meeting that happens every summer. And this is where the elites meet up and pretty much plan how they're going to do many different things, from how economies are going to be run to how wars are going to be done. Well, Chavez's number was different from their number, and Chavez is selling only $50 a barrel. He actually, got a lot of business that way. But the thing was that profit wasn't going to big corporations and ExxonMobil, Shell, and wasn't going into the pockets of billionaires, but it was going back to the people because it was nationalized. And nationalized industries is a vital part of what Chavez did was nationalize oil and nationalization of an economy, and stuff like that, in oil, in electric, and basic things like that, is a great step forward, and it'd be great if the United States was to do so. Because then you can use that profit to, for social programs. You can use that profit for many different things. We don't need ExxonMobil. We don't need Shell. We don't need these massive oil corporations for people. That's another thing that I think people. It's really it's like a form of defending our captors when we start saying stuff like that. It's like, oh, you can't talk shit about corporations. You need them. We need them for jobs. We need them to be able to run our vital aspects of our lives. By saying that if there wasn't these big corporations, then the oil wouldn't get to our gas pumps or whatever, or that if we didn't have these giant corporations, trade as we know it would stop going. That's not true. Behind this corporations are just people that have organized in a way to make a profit. We can organize as the people in order to run those same things, but to run those same things for the benefit of the average people, rather than for the billionaires and the executives. How much money that those people make. We have as our Secretary of State a former ExxonMobil CEO, Rex Tillerson. You can imagine what kind of money that guy was making. But of course, this just goes to another thing as to how blatant now is the oligarchy that is the United States, where they don't even try to hide anymore. And they say that his actual his net worth is only $245 million. But I know that he was already criticizing Venezuela not too long ago, and that was one of the earlier things that he did. And Tillerson, they of course, one of the main things that they've been saying is that they say that he's too close to Russia or whatnot. But you can imagine that they'll steer him in the direction that they want. And I'm talking about the elites. They'll steer him in the direction they want. They're not going to allow the United States to get closer to Russia. The elites, they want the World War between Russia and the United States to happen, and preferably in their mind, what they do want, of course, if the war breaks out, is that they want the United States to win the war, because Russia has kicked out the Rothschild banks, so they wouldn't want Russia to win the war. But they want the war to go down, because there's a lot of profit they can make in a war between Russia and the United States. But Tillerson's now that it goes also along the lines of things when you see Tillerson's statements, is that it's like seems to be kind of the recurrent theme with the Trump presidency. Like, even if he is even if he was supposedly pro-Russian, he seems to be against all their allies. How well is that going to work? And also, Tillerson is a supporter of Saudi Arabia, which is one of the biggest adversaries to Russia in the region. He supported the Saudi Arabian-led intervention in Yemen, which was the war that has been going down ever since the Houthis took over in 2015, and the Houthis have been fighting off the pro-Saudi Hadi government, which is the one that was ousted by the people there, and also terrorists such as Al Qaeda, ISIS, that are fighting in the country. The Houthis have been fighting Al Qaeda for a while, and the Houthis are backed by Syria and Iran, and still in power, but they only control like they don't control the majority of the country land-wise, but by population-wise, I think they control it. Or they control all the bigger cities. Which the civil war there has been a horribly unfortunate thing, and I'm sure that if Chavez was still around, that he would have shown his solidarity with the Houthis at some point, as he showed his solidarity to Assad in their fight against the United States-backed rebels, which in many ways this Yemen war is like a miniature version of the Syrian civil war, for a little bit smaller player. Yemen's is the poorest country in the Middle East. So when it comes to their standing on the world and what kind of influence they have over the world, it's not quite to the level of Syria. In fact, Syria's, I would say, is significantly bigger. Yemen's a significantly smaller player on the world stage. I mean, to be the Middle East, though, wasn't, people would say, wow, the poorest country in the Middle East, that's very poor. Well, not that long ago, a lot of those countries in the Middle East weren't in the same predicament they are in, and they actually, for example, like Syria looked like a modern country. Actually, it was a modern country before it got bombed, before the Civil War broke out, before before the tariffs were imported by the United States and Western governments. Israel also. Can't talk about Syria without talking about what Israel's done. And ISIS looks to be pretty much, for the most part, actually has been looking at this map of the Yemen war. Their territory has been pretty much eliminated, but Hadi-led government, they have a lot of territory right now. They're just like it's almost reminiscent of back in the day. There was North Yemen and there was South Yemen, and North Yemen was more in the western part, and South Yemen was more to the eastern part. Despite the names, it wasn't like it was split in half, north and south. It was more like the northwest belonged to North Yemen. You can look up a map at some point and see it yourself. And also, right now that's going on, Al Qaeda has taken over a lot of territory in the central part, and there appears to be one bigger city. I look at this map, but they're pretty much, for the most part, nothing too big controlled by Al Qaeda. I see like a little speck of ISIS in the middle of the country, a couple of speck there. This is, I think, updated February at some point. So, for the most part, it looks like the country is the Hadi government controlling a lot of the desolate territory, but they can seem to control the majority of territory. And then where a lot of the cities are controlled by the Houthis, fortunately, the capital, of course, controlled by the Houthis. Houthis, whatever, however you pronounce it. The important thing is who's behind the two powers and whatnot, and the fact is it's pretty much like a smaller proxy war. Like I said, Syria at a smaller level. And with less ISIS involved. Because ISIS controls a lot of territory. They're like the major... ISIS is like the they are the major opposition force inside of Syria. It's not the rebels. The rebels is but the rebels, the Free Syrian Army. The Free Syrian Army is the second biggest, I would say, opposition force inside of Syria. ISIS is the actual biggest force that's fighting Assad, and that's one of the biggest lies that's being told on the media about the situation, is that ISIS is that ISIS is not part of the rebel groups or whatever, and that the rebel groups are actually putting a legitimate fight to ISIS. It's all one loose conglomeration of terrorists, what you could say, about Syria, Al Qaeda, ISIS, Free Syrian Army, all fighting against Assad, and also the Kurdish have, I think, some of the Kurds they're pro-Assad, some of them are not, are have gone the clashes of Assad, and they've been kind of an interesting mix how the Kurdish groups have been inside of Syria. Though, I had Scott Rickard on here, a commentator from Press TV and RT, and we had our little conversation a few weeks ago, and he's saying that that he thought that Trump's going to abandon support for the rebels, and he's going to give it to the Kurdish groups in order to destabilize the country, which I don't see a change in the policy. It appears that the rebels are still receiving United States aid, still receiving United States help as of now. I don't think it's going to, a total shutdown of the aid to the rebel groups. What I actually could see is that, like I've been talking about before, eventually they'll just go to the plan of invasion rather than continuing to deal with the rebel groups in the future. Continuing to try to overthrow the government in Syria with rebel groups and having the rebel groups do all the work, because it's not working out for them. The Syrian government is continuing to take back more territory. In fact, inside of Palmyra, the Syrian government took back more territory there this week, or took back the city from ISIS, which they lost it before, I think. They lost it before, and they've gained it back. Which Palmyra is an ancient city with a lot of ancient architecture or whatnot there. It's a pretty symbolic city to take back, and that's one more big city. Now the question is, since Aleppo has been liberated, Palmyra liberated, the question is, when does they make the push towards Raqqa? And I know they also have other things, like they need to keep what's been going on by Deir ez-Zor, however you pronounce it. Deir ez-Zor, the city where the Syrian soldiers were killed by the United States strike. Those by accident, in quotation. 106 Syrian soldiers were killed there. Because they said they got bad intel or whatever. They accidentally hit the wrong targets, and they hit the Syrian military. Instead of hitting ISIS, they hit the Syrian military. So just like they have like a little island there, and they've been struggling to hold on to that, and it'd be highly questionable if they lose that territory. You could say that the United States did help. You'll definitely be able to say that the United States helped brought about that fall of that territory. And then another interesting thing about the over in the Syrian situation is that I look at the map, and there continues to be a little speck of ISIS territory right at the border with Israel. While the Golan Heights, which is Israeli occupied territory in Syria, that's Syria's land, but that's Israel occupied. Or you could say that's the Israel who's occupying Palestine is occupying Syrian land. They've occupied, which to them it doesn't matter what's their land and what's the Palestinian land. They don't have, again, none of that stuff's actually their land. Israelis are occupiers and invaders. They came from East Europe not long ago, in the 1940s or whatnot. And you have like Benjamin Netanyahu, who I believe his father is Hungarian, and these people are they're Khazarians. They don't have connections really to most of them. They don't have connections to the biblical Jews. A lot of the biblical Jews converted to Islam, and the Palestinians that they're bombing, and the Semitic people are actually that are there. That's the Palestinians for the most part. They're Ashkenazi. Ashkenazi are, those are from Europe, Eastern Europe, the Turkish area, but they're not from there. Palestine is Palestinians are actually the Semitic people that they always talk about. They always say that if you are anti-Israel, you're anti-Semitic. Well, they're anti-Semitic by bombing the Palestinian people. Uh, it's an ad hominem attack is what they throw at the people when they throw that term at. What the Zionist lobby, the Zionist trolls, any kind of criticism towards them is not allowed. And Chavez, he didn't have any real problem with criticizing Israel. He had no problem say what he thought about Bush. I mean, that was I think a lot of us have seen that famous thing with when he said, "You are a donkey, Mr. Bush." With his little English they knew, was able to say that, and the first thing he opens up is he says, "Te metiste conmi, pajarito," which he says "little bird," which I think translates something like "dick" in Spanish. I speak Spanish, but I don't get sometimes the nuances of all their slang or whatnot, and I think that kind of goes along the line. But that's how he opened it up, and then he said. Then he says then he starts to go on with the part where he's saying that he's a donkey or whatever, and then he says if he ever has a crazy idea of invading Venezuela, he'll be waiting in Savannah, and then he starts calling them many different names of what he thought he was, calling him a genocidal person, called him an idiot. He called him a trunk even at one point, which I guess was referring to that George W. Bush had a drinking problem. That's one of the things that he says, is that he was sober for 10 years or something like that before the presidency. But Chavez didn't hold back on that, and that was one of the things that was great about him, is that he didn't have quite the same, like when Russia or whatever makes a statement critical of the United States, of course they always are diplomatic and they don't quite say anything too bombastic. But when Chavez made a statement, made a speech or whatnot, he didn't have a problem with being bombastic. That was one of the great things, and I think that's why he captured a lot of people's attention when he did his speeches or whatnot, like when he told the ambassador of the United States to leave in 2008. He did the speech, "Váyanse Yankees de mierda," which is leave shit Yankees. That's pretty much how it translates to. Yeah, it was a interesting speech for sure, but I love that speech, that part, and he actually also he starts to go on to say that we're the sons of Simon Bolivar, the sons of Guaycampuro, Tupac Amaru, these South American heroes, which Simon Bolivar was the liberator of. That's one of the biggest people that should be knowing about the situation of South America. That Simon Bolivar was the famous liberator that liberated Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, I believe parts of Peru, Panama, and Bolivia were all liberated by Simon Bolivar in the early 1800s. And a movement that Chavez made was called the Bolivarian Revolution. And that was the one of the people that he really looked up to the most was Simon Bolivar. Simon Bolivar he's liked by really, that's the weird thing, is that you have people, I think, on both sides of the Venezuelan situation that look up to Simon Bolivar, because again, he's like one of those figures like he'd be like a founding father or something like that here in the United States, would be kind of an equivalent. But we have multiple founding fathers. Venezuela, they have him, and there's no one that's quite at the same level when it comes to the importance of that region's history than Simon Bolivar. Now Hugo Chavez has moved up into be one of the most important people up there, but when it comes to the people around with the founding of Venezuela, no one's quite at the level of Simon Bolivar and its importance. And Simon Bolivar, Che Guevara, Hugo Chavez is in that kind of category of the most important people of South America. 14 years being the president. He was there for 3 different American presidents: Bill Clinton when he first arrived, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and faced 4 different elections. I think again, 1998, 2000, 2006, 2012. That's the thing, is that people say this dictatorial. He faced 4 different elections during his presidency over 14 years, and those elections were verified by international monitors to be, great. There was no real signs of a, fixed election or whatnot. And even Jimmy Carter acknowledged that these were, somebody from the other side acknowledged that these elections were legitimate. And one of the things that was about that certified the election, I guess, it verifies the election, is that they do the electronic vote, but they also do the paper ballots. They get a receipt for their vote, which is something that we don't even get here in the United States with these little phony elections or whatnot. And we have the voting machines. Is that you can't even you don't get a receipt, and even with the vote, even with paper ballot, either way, I think the elections have been rigged for a long time inside the United States. I think it goes back to way before. I think it goes back all the way back to, of course, when the Federal Reserve became an entity. That's how long that's been a factor that you could say that the elections have been rigged here inside the United States. It's a long, it's been going on for a long time. JFK, I think he just snuck past the elite, and that's how he was able to come about. And then ever since JFK, there hasn't been a president that stood up to the Federal Reserve. There hasn't been a president that stood up to Israel. And the people say that Donald Trump has somewhat stood up to Israel. That's not true. I mean, all he said, he pretty much just pushed most of Israel's lies in his little speech or whatever when he met with Netanyahu, and he said that they should slow down or whatever on the settlements. He just gave a little suggestion or whatnot. He didn't even seem forceful or whatever and seem firm on a statement. And how could you really act like you're firm on that statement when you're pretty much push all the other lies? I mean, remember his little speech to AIPAC? That's what it was just full of, with Zionist lies about, Palestinians equal terrorism, the Iran threat. That's one of his favorite things to push, is the falsified Iranian threat, that apparently the Iran is out to destroy Israel or whatnot, and that America's next or whatever after they destroy Israel. That's painting Iran as this scary monster has been one of Benjamin Netanyahu's favorite things to do. Benjamin Netanyahu has been painting Iran to be this type of thing since the 1992 or whatever. I think that was about 1992 was when he started saying that they were 6 months away from the nuclear bomb. And that's what the media has been saying since the 1980s. Netanyahu's also the same one that was talking about how beneficial it would be to the region or whatnot, that if we had took out Saddam, that was about 15 years ago now. If Netanyahu says it, us, the American people, should not support it. The invasion of Iraq was a total disaster, of course, and now there's more suicide bombings than ever. Now, Saddam wasn't a good guy. Saddam was a horrible dictator that killed a lot of people and was backed by the United States, but that was not the solution, was to invade, and also to do it in the way that they did it, of the removal of Saddam, Uh, the only thing that's ended up beneficial, I think, for the Iraqi people is that the government ended up backfiring on the United States, and now that they are establishing an alliance with Iran, it's really unprecedented that Iraq and Iran are working together, even though that they were at war with each other in the 80s. There's been a history of Iraq and Iran being at each other's throats, but they seem to actually be working with each other. And then I saw like the Human Rights Watch or whatever said that the Iraqi government's targeting the families of terrorists, that they're putting them in jail and tearing down their houses. When I saw that, very quickly what came to mind is, wait a minute, this sounds like some kind of story that they push against Assad. Assad is his fight against ISIS is very similar. And I think at this point, maybe this is that Iraq is turning into another type of serious situation where they're going to try to remove the government that's in place because they're too close to Iran, and that they are, they're actually legitimately fighting the terrorism. The terrorism that's been imported by the United States government. Iraq and Iran are finally working together on that front. Which are Iraq, Iran, Syria, they're almost like making like a triple alliance now at this point. And also now Yemen's joined into the mix, but Yemen's busy with their own war on their own front, but it is really kind of like one fight. Yemen being a smaller player compared to the other three. But I think that's what that was about. That the Human Rights Watch or whatever saying that, you always have to be weary about these groups that claim to be non-biased or whatever. They often, these supposedly non-biased groups that watch human rights and whatnot, because a lot of times they actually are biased, and they're biased towards the United States, and they ignore stuff in a lot of times in the United States allies countries of horrible things that go on there. In Syria, the rebels, have been obviously responsible for a lot of human rights violations, and the Syrian government, it seems like there's all these accusations with very vague evidence or no, like there was the one thing where there was like, where was the source for this when they said that 13,000 people were, hung at one point by the Assad government, and the evidence seemed to be kind of there wasn't really even a source for the evidence. It was that pretty much fell off. Like you didn't even see that again after a short time. Maybe people really didn't buy into that bullshit, so they have to put in more believable bullshit. That's what it seems like, is that at this point now that they're starting, they know that they're starting to lose the information war, and people are no longer buying the same lies that people bought, 30 years ago or whatnot. Before the internet, before the when back in the days where it was the TV, the radio, magazines, it was a little bit easier to control the flow of information. Anyways, we're at about 10:10, and if anybody wants to call in, chip in for a little bit, I have the phone line 718-717-8296, 718-717-8296. Chavez has now been gone 4 years in Venezuela. The last 4 years have definitely been filled with a lot of turmoil. It's been a very interesting span for the people of Venezuela, but there's still his very loyal supporters in the streets of Caracas that back him. That's where a lot of times what happens is that the opposition has a march, and the people in support of Chavez come out in huge numbers to back Chavez. But they continue to try to slander his legacy. There's a documentary coming out or whatever on like Telemundo or something, a documentary series of Chavez, which is going to try to slander him and paint him out to be a horrible dictator or whatnot. They continue to, one of the other things that they made this ugly comparison is that they said that that Hugo Chavez and Donald Trump are similar. I think that they say that because of how outspoken both are. Uh, but of course, Donald Trump is outspoken mainly on a lot of the stuff that he says is just rhetoric, and another bunch of stuff. You just talk about frivolous stuff or whatever. How he gets into some Twitter feud or whatever with Rosie O'Donnell or some shit. Hugo Chavez is talking about the massacre of Palestinians by the Israeli government. That's in Hugo Chavez's government. The actions that they did, it went a little bit further than just the rhetoric. Donald Trump, the comparisons, it's two different things. It's a puppet versus not a puppet. And Donald Trump so far has continued the same. His actions don't match the words. He has, if he really wanted to fix the relationship with Russia, the sanctions would be dropped already. I think the sanctions would be dropped just about immediately. There's no reason that there should be the sanctions against Russia, and it's an act of war, sanctions. You don't put acts of war against your friends, and you don't tell your friends that they should return property that is theirs. 96.6% of the people voted to join the Russian Federation, Crimea, but yet the United States government insists that they should return it. I guess for what, the 3.4% that voted against the annexation of the Crimea. It wasn't a forced military takeover, and it was protecting the Russian people there. 65% of the people inside of Crimea are ethnic Russians, and the government of Ukraine now has been persecuting the Russian population inside the country. You see these horrible crimes that are being committed in East Ukraine. As I was talking with Sergei Bardashov last week about what's been going inside the Ukraine, is that Ukraine has become a mess of the West Ukrainian and the thugs under the West Ukrainian government committing these violent acts. Like what happened at the Odessa massacre, where in that building, 40 people were killed. About 40 people were killed, including pregnant women that were killed after the thugs started throwing Molotov cocktails inside the building. People like the Azov Battalion in the right sector, Sovoboyda. You could say that's what's lumped into the general thugs that are not technically part of the government side of Ukraine, but pretty much are. Anyways, right sector and Sovoboyda have political representation, and the Azov Battalion, they're not politically represented, but they definitely do the West Ukraine's bidding. But yeah, I think the right sector that committed the attack in 2014, and that's the 3-year anniversary of that's coming up in about 2 months. I think it was May 2nd, 2014 was the date of the attack, and you didn't really hear anything about it on the media. Here in the United States, they pretty much just said, they just pretty much continued. Well, I think at that time, what was the fluff story that was going on then? I don't know. Well, they have just pretty much continued inside the United States with the fluff stories and stuff like that doesn't get covered. It's like in 2015, all the stuff that was going on with the TPP or whatever or whatnot. And despite the TPP going on, they're talking about Caitlyn Jenner and last year, the transgender bathrooms became the big thing that was talked about constantly on the TVs. You have it's called programming for a reason, and programming the people in order to talk about certain things and think a certain way, and the big issues they don't want people to talk about. But they love people talk about politics, as it's the politics that's approved of by the televisions. Stuff like transgender bathrooms and gay marriage or whatnot. They've really taken up a huge parts of TV time. Them talk about these things. that's the kind of things they want people to talk about, but they don't want people to talk about why is our government has been funding terrorists in Libya, Syria, Yemen. Why is our government funding neo-Nazis in Ukraine? The foreign policy of the United States has how despicable it is. Imagine if the American people knew what their tax dollars is going to. It's like what George H.W. Bush said. If they ever found out what we did, they would chase us down the streets with nooses and hang us. H.W. Bush knew how heinous of nature, knows how, I should say, he's still alive somehow, knows how heinous of nature these acts that the United States government commits via with the United States military, via in what is done to protect the military-industrial complex, the elites, the New World Order. H.W. Bush knows this, knows what's done to defend the bankers. And he was, as the president, he was another puppet. And even though he was only there for 4 years, he still knows, just like the other ones, any president is complicit. That any president, since JFK is complicit in it. Carter, Ford, Nixon, all of them are complicit in the doing the bidding for the bankers and these all these horrible wars and whatnot. These you've had Vietnam War, you've had the Iraq War, now the Syria War, that even though the United States is not officially in yet, or at least not big numbers, you have a major push probably happening soon. Trump was talking about putting he was talking about putting ground troops in Syria. And I think he was saying to fight ISIS, but of course that should be in quotations, fighting ISIS, as that's what they've said about all these other little military actions, and it ended up being against Assad. And you still have big parts of Syria, it's still under ISIS control. If you look at the efforts between the United States fight against ISIS and the Russian fight against ISIS, Russia's fight against ISIS actually being a true fight against ISIS, made major advancements in just weeks, while the United States military did practically nothing over a course of, a few years now that the operations against ISIS in Syria have been going on. They had been in there a little over a year by the time the Russians got in. They got in like late September of 2015. And it was pretty much for ISIS. It was just like playtime over, and it actually got serious for them compared to when they were dealing with the United States. The Russians came in there. Well, and of course they had to deal with the Syrians and the Iranians. Those were legitimate fighters against them. The biggest fighters against ISIS inside of the biggest fighters against ISIS inside of Syria have been Syria and Iran, and Russia's also had a major role. And Chavez was a supporter of Assad and also a supporter of Gaddafi when he was still alive. And Gaddafi actually died before Chavez, but Assad is still here, 5 or 4 years later. And I wonder what would be Chavez's take on all the things that went down with the United States' supposed intervention against ISIS and whatnot. Would he have called it out like Castro called it out? Castro said that ISIS was, I think he said this along the lines of ISIS is Israel, United States creation. And Castro's also said, he's made comments about the Ukraine situation. He made comments about the Ukraine situation, West Ukrainian situation, about the Ukrainian situation with MH17, Ukrainian situation as a whole. What he said was that the MH17 was a ploy by, I think he said that about the West Ukraine was using the MH17 as a ploy, as a false flag, in order to spark the intervention against Russia or something like that, or to agitate against Russia. Ooh, man, I'm tired a little bit. Uh, but continue on with the show. Like, Hugo Chavez, as adored by his people as he was, he's the most popular president in Venezuelan history, and they can slander him all they want here in the United States, but they can't take that away from him. They can't from his legacy is how liked he was by his people. You see the people swarming to see him when he came to visit, and come to visit like in an open air Jeep. He wouldn't come to visit like in a bulletproof vehicle or whatever, like what you expect a world leader to be rolling around in. No, he was just rolling around like a normal person in the open air Jeep, but was a lot of people coming to greet him, of course, in whatever city he came to visit. Chavez definitely had the people supporting him, and that's the thing is that Maduro hasn't been able to get quite the same amount of support from the people as his predecessor, Hugo Chavez. And I think that's one of the things is that it's somewhat of a power vacuum that it was very hard to fill the kind of role that Chavez had the people of Venezuela. No one, that's the thing is I don't know if even Diosdado Cabellos could ever fulfill that role. And I know that Maduro wasn't quite able to. No, but as president of Venezuela, I think that he's done it as good a job pretty much as he could. Or as good a job as really anyone could. I think he's put in his effort for sure, but I think that he's just in a very, very tricky time, and that this is the time that maybe they needed him more than ever, Chavez, and he died, unfortunately, from the cancer. Even though there was an investigation opened up by the Venezuelan government about whether that was potentially he was inflicted with a cancer weapon, that it's known that the CIA and the Russian intelligence and the CIA have. But I would say most importantly, CIA and Russian intelligence have it. Both of them developed it in the Cold War. But I would say that probably the most importantly, knowing that the CIA has it, I'm sure that they probably used it a few times, knowing how they play. They play very dirty. And the CIA might have used it against all the Latin American leaders around the time of 2009 or so, because it seemed like a lot of them got sick with cancer. I don't think it was coincidental that you had Chavez, you had I think Correa, there was Morales, a lot of them got sick around that time, and Kirchner died from cancer, actually he had a heart attack. But that bet is a contributing factor that he had a heart attack. Chavez died, and a few others got sick. I think and they recovered after some time. I don't think any of them are like currently sick with it. I think that they recovered. But they all coincidentally ran into problems with cancer around the same time, and we know this technology exists. It might take some years before they're able to confirm whether they used a cancer weapon. The United States government used a cancer weapon against Hugo Chavez. But when they do, imagine what kind of announcement that'll be to the world if they can actually prove that. Like Arafat, it took them years before they came back with when they said that there good evidence that they might have poisoned him. And they haven't confirmed they was poisoned, but I think that he was poisoned, Arafat. He died a few years ago, and what was that, 2004 or something like that he died. And they found like arsenic on his clothes or something like that. There was definitely evidence that he might have been poisoned. And considering how hard some of the people that like really like Israel go to slander him, I would say that Arafat might have been there might have been a reason why they poisoned him. You know, he was a long time, you know, one of the biggest figures in the uh, Palestinian movement, and you know, people try to say that he like ripped off the Palestinian people or something. He had that he took billions of dollars and stuff like that. He was 75 though when the time he died, so it was a little bit, you know, people I think have contributed to that. They just died of old age. And you know, is a legacy. I mean, it's like divided. Palestinian people see him as a lot of the Palestinian people see him as a hero that fought for them, while of course the Israelis they slander him as a terrorist. And as I would say, I think it is slander because I don't think there really is too much basis that Arafat was such a horror, you know, as horrible as they try to make it seem like. I mean, I think that he wasn't perfect either, but I think that there definitely was good evidence that he was poisoned. They said that around October of 2004 he got sick. They said he had the flu or whatever, and they took him to the hospital, and they said he died on November 11th. So he was sick on October 25th. Says he vomited during a staff meeting, and then he was dead by 2004 or November 11th, 2004, and said he had a stroke. And I'm trying to find that part where I remember seeing that he had like arsenic on his clothes or something like that. Uh, you know, back a few years later. Yeah, it, it says that the reports that the Swiss forensic team had found levels of polonium in Arafat's ribs and pelvis at 18 to 36 times the average, according to the Swiss expert team, including notably experts in radiochemistry, radiophysics, and legal medicine on a probability scale ranging from 1 to 6. Deaths by polonium poisoning is around 5. But this is what Al Jazeera said, so we'll take this as a grain of salt. Al Jazeera reported that the scientists were confident up to 83% level of polonium poisoning occurred, but Francois Bochud, the head of the Swiss team, clarified to Al Jazeera that this is not the case and that the scale does not allow simple division like this. He said only that the poison by polonium is reasonably supported. And it goes on to say right here that the forensic biologist Nathan Lentz of the John Jay College of Criminal Justice says that he reports results are consistent with a possible polonium poisoning, but there's certainly not a smoking gun here. And it says, unlike the Swiss report, the French and Russian reports were not made public at the time. The Swiss experts read that the French and Russian reports explained that the radiological data measured by the other team support the conclusion of a probable death by polonium poisoning. In March 2015, a French prosecutor announced that his death was of natural causes, and the polonium-alleged traces were found were environmental. Apparently, the Russian team didn't find anything of polonium poisoning, and which I'm not saying that who knows when they say the Russian team. I don't know. I don't think that's like necessarily like the Russian government team or whatever that did the investigation. That might have just been a group of a few Russians. So I don't know. They could have been easily bought out. And say a fake report or whatnot, or they might have been biased themselves. They might have been one of the Russians that are one of the traitor Russians, or whatever, that are belong to Kordosky's team or whatever, and to the Zionists inside of Russia. Uh, who knows what was the case? But I think there definitely was a good chance that he was poisoned, and if they were able to potentially bring him down via poisoning, then Chavez might have been also a target. And the people have been saying that for a long time that pretty much just immediately after Chavez's death, people were saying that he might have been poisoned, given the cancer weapon. Those also, of course, when the United States government responded to that, they just made it seem like ludicrous. There was no way that could have happened. But of course, the technology exists, and the technology exists and it's very much possible. And this is a Pravda report. Again, to take this as with a little bit of grain of salt, because Pravda is like they're supportive of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation. Definitely wouldn't definitely is not what I would say is impartial media. But let's see what they have to say. This is from June 6th of last year. This is when they wrote the article. This is the Venezuelan researchers claim that they had found out nanoweapon former president of the country, who Chavez was killed with, the U.S. could have been involved in infecting Chavez with cancer cells, as has been elaborating in such a plan. Igor Nikulin, former member of UN Commission of Biological Weapon military expert, is not only Hugo Chavez, who died because of cancer, but also many other Latin American leaders at a quite young age. The Americans have corresponding elaborations. They significantly outperform other countries in biology and nanotechnology. Chavez was probably poisoned at the UN headquarters during the General Assembly in New York if it had been a unique case. One could have said that's an accident, 2 cases a coincidence, 3 cases is regularity. And the article pretty much ends from there. But yeah, that was the guy who apparently said that little part was Igor Nikulin, former member of the UN Commission of Biological Weapon. Also, is not wrote with the best grammar either. Pravda is I like them for some of their articles, but then again, I mean, for me, it's their name's too synonymous with the Pravda of the. I mean, I think it's a continuous organization, but Pravda was the name of the Communist Party newspaper, or whatever, back in the days of the Soviet Union. So I usually stay away from their page for the most part. Nowadays, I'm more go to Sputnik or RT if I'm going to go Russian media, but and yeah, it was Kirchner, was Chavez. There's many different South American leaders that got infected with cancer or developed cancer around the same time. Though it really does seem like that it was from an outside source that might have gave these people the cancer. Chavez was only 58 when he died. Kirchner was 60 when he died. All these leaders were, for the most part, were very young. I mean, I think Mojica might have gotten cancer, and he was older. Mojica's now like 86 years old. I think he's turning 87 this year. He's the one that's been called the world's poorest president, the one that drives around the VW Beetle and everything. yeah, he's getting up there. Um, and he didn't become president until he was like 80 years old, and he became kind of like a model on how to, I guess you could say, how to be modest as a world leader. And it's something that a lot of world leaders have forgotten. But Jose Mujica, for example, like when he went to the hospital, they showed him saw a picture of him waiting his term at a public hospital rather than, I guess, surprising thing that they should, usually have their own like medical team or whatever, these world leaders or whatnot. But yeah, and I don't know how true that part is. I just saw a picture and it was a caption of it. Uh, yeah, when he took the presidency, he was 79, just about and then he turned 80. Or wait, actually, I got that wrong. He was 74, about to turn 75. He's 5 years younger than I thought. I thought he was born in 1930. Born in 1935. He's 81, going to be turning 82 on May 20th. He was only president for 5 years, and he was only president for 3 years prior to the Chavez's death. But I think they met, a few times before Chavez died. When it comes to like who was made Chavez's closest South American ally, he had him and the Kirchners were pretty close. As they're both bigger players, I think that Venezuela and Argentina working together is pretty crucial. One of the last things that Cristina Kirchner was talking about was the revoking of dual citizens as Israel. I know that if you went to fight for the IDF, that was the rule she was going to make, that you'd lose your citizenship with Argentina, and that was one of the last things that Kirchner was working on before her term ended and the election happened. And then Macri, who's now been cozying up with Israel and cozying up with the West, has now been the president since 2015. He's pretty much acting like he's acting very undemocratically. One of the major things that he did was the shutting down a Telesur in his own country, where Telesur had been the media that a few of these countries, left-wing countries, had set up around 2005, and they like Argentina, Venezuela, Ecuador. There was a few countries that set up Telesur. They made, but their government, the government Macri, decided to shut it down in Argentina. So these people often, on the right wing opposition to these countries, often cried about how bad that they didn't have any kind of media that represented them or whatever, and that they tried to make it seem like there was no freedom of speech, but then they actually shut down freedom of speech when they're actually in power. It would be the same situation in Venezuela if Capriles is ever to get the power. Believe me, it would be no different. And wow, we're at 10:38, so I'm going to remind everyone if they want to call in, get some words in. Number 718-717-8296, 718-717-8296 here at Voice of Rebellion Radio. This is your host, Chris J, here on another Sunday night. This is just going a little sidetracking, going on a little bit more of a personal note, is that down here in Florida, it was an absolutely beautiful day today, which I remember the day that Chavez died. I remember, I'm pretty sure it was a hotter day, March 5th, 2013. I remember coming back. I was after hanging out with my friends, and went to school that day. It was a Tuesday. When I was still at Bogue City High School over here, and I was a freshman that year. And then I went on the internet after hanging out with my friends. It was later. It was now like the evening. I looked at it was like around 7 o'clock. I think I got on the internet, and I see that Hugo Chavez had died, and I was pretty surprised. I was like, and I go out to tell my dad or whatever that I was like, oh no, you see that happened? It wasn't quite as interested in me, of course. He's, of course, my investment in the situation of that country be a little bit more than your average American. But I already, from time I was 12, 13, I already had kind of, looked up to Chavez, and when I liked to I liked what he had to say. I liked his style of speech or whatever, but when he died, I was pretty surprised. So I think the speeches and stuff like that, I more like looked into it after he died. But I liked how I knew that he was fought for his people there, and then afterwards, I remember the drama unfolding between Maduro, Capriles, and then I remember the election or whatever coming down to on April 19th or whatever, the election coming down to 0.5%, and when I went down to Colombia in June, just about like a month and a half after the election, I remember Capriles still talking about, he was on Colombian television crying about the loss, still at that point. And, he showed that they couldn't accept the democratic process. And even later, they still were crying about the election that definitely went to Maduro's favor. And I wonder if that's going to happen again in 2018, that if Capriles loses again, is he going to cry about it the same way? But Capriles also lost the election in 2012, October 2012. Chavez easily won the election. We had 56% of the vote against Capriles, and then won his fourth term in the for presidency of Venezuela. And yeah, Capriles. I think this would be the fourth election he would have lost, right? Or no, third election he'd lost if Capriles loses this one. They don't really. I mean, to be honest, they don't have a ton of good candidates over on the right wing of Venezuela. I don't think. Leopoldo Lopez was kind of like one of their figures, but this man was responsible for 43 people's deaths. He ended up getting 13 years in prison. And people said that he ended up in jail for 13 years for tweets or whatever. That's not true. Is that the people that he had led violent protests? These were not peaceful protests during when the protests started. There was there was definitely violence. You see the pictures. In fact, there was one case where I remember Fox News was sharing pictures of Caracas, I think, or some Venezuelan city, but they were passing them off as there were protests that were going out, and as they were part of the Baltimore riots. And then I was like, wait a minute, those are not, or I didn't say it, but somebody said it's like actually they're from Venezuela, and I was like, wait, that means that was the Venezuelan opposition. These are the people that the Fox News has supported quite a few times. And I know Fox Latino has definitely supported the Venezuelan opposition. That's one of the major things that they talk about. In order to try to discredit the protesters or whatever that were in Baltimore, which of course there was some violence, of course, in Baltimore, riots and whatnot. The people that you could see looting were probably paid provocateurs, like at Ferguson, but it was sort of legitimate protesters. You can't lump the entire movements of Ferguson and Baltimore into all, as everyone there being paid. There's paid and there was unpaid. I think that there was more unpaid protesters, people that were there for a lot of them were there for legitimately because they were upset about the what the police had done in their communities compared to the paid protesters. But of course, it doesn't take too many of the paid protesters to make a complete mess. By the way, the day of the election, April 14th, 2013, the special election between Capriles and Maduro, where it came down to 1.5%, 49.1% to 15.6%. Capriles Radonsky took 8 districts, while Maduro, or states, and Maduro won 15 states plus, I think, is like their capital state. It's a CB. I'm guessing there's like the district of Caracas. Caracas. That's guys like Caracas. Yeah, that'll be the. Keep just going through some mispronunciation of the Caracas. I think it's like Caracas. How did I say it? I know I mispronounced it, but it's Caracas. Correct way to pronounce Caracas. As I was saying, see, I was there. That's how I said Caracas, but it's Caracas. And Maduro was sworn in 5 days after that. Now, April 19th is the day he was sworn in. And Capriles appealed, and it went through the Supreme Court of Justice in Venezuela, but the appeal was denied on August 7th, 2013. I'm guessing that if it says denied, that means it actually went through, and it took a few months. I'm guessing that's how. Yeah, it says June 12th. I think it's saying there that went through on June 12th, 2013. The results of the audit were announced. The CNE, or the National Electoral Council, had found no discrepancy with the initial results and confirmed Maduro's electoral victory. The CNE was probably because it's like in Spanish, it's in a different order, those words, but or that abbreviation. That's probably why I was seeing that one day. I remember in June, I saw Capriles complain on the TV about that, about the election. Probably after that happened. In fact, I'm thinking that might have been that exact day or right around that time, June 12th, 2013. But yeah, it was a huge mess. The whole part of filling the vacancy of Chavez after he died, the special election or whatnot, but of course it could go. It could have went a lot worse, and Venezuela did handle it. Did handle it well. I think that the Venezuelan government, they faced a lot of problems since, and there's been, and also before there was like the sabotage attempt. Or I think that might have been after Chavez's death. There was a sabotage an electric grid or something like that, or attempt to sabotage an electric grid of Venezuela. Been many things like that. I think probably if you actually knew all the clandestine things that the CIA has done, which I don't think really anyone knows, but and that's the thing of them. I bet that place is crawling with CIA agents, unfortunately. Especially with Colombia right there, they could sneak in, and I think part of the reason why they shut down the border was the paramilitary. Because the paramilitary were the paramilitaries were sneaking across that border, and also the drug traffickers were crossing the borders a lot, and that's why Venezuela was why they supported the border closing. They were the ones that actually did the border closing. I don't think it was the other way around. It was Venezuela shut down the border for a while in 2015, going into 2016, and I think the border. I think it might be still shut now. The border, in my opinion, I think that it should be very closely watched, as long as that the Colombian government is still pro as long as the Colombian government remains being pro-American, as long as it's a pro-United States or pro-United States government there, they should definitely watch it very closly because there's going to be attempting sabotage through that. And now they've been making progress, unfortunately, in the elites. The United States have been able to bring back Brazil to their side, bring back Argentina to their side, Peru back to their side. As Peru used to have Ollanta Humala, I think is how you pronounce his name. Dilma Rousseff was replaced with Michael Temer. Christina Kirchner replaced with Mauricio Macri. So those three recently went. And, a while ago we had Paraguay, went from Fernando Lugo to Horacio Cartes. Cristina Fernandez Kirchner and Mauricio Macri, I think that was the first one out of the recent bunch of three. But that was a major one because, stand that Cristina Fernandez the Kirchner was making against Israel, and that Cristina Fernandez Kirchner was one of Chavez's. The Kirchners were very close to Chavez. I think also you could say that Morales is very close to Chavez. It was the whole movement worked. They were very close together, and they were collaborating towards a better South America. And they were about to make they were working on a bank to get rid of foreign banker influence or whatnot with the UNASUR that they're working on. It was a massive project that Chavez and Correa, President of Ecuador, Lula, and then later Dilma, they were working on. I think they started around like 2006. The project came to be 2007, and now they are, it's supposed to be coming into. I think it was supposed to be coming into effect like last year or whatnot, but I think it kind of got stalled, especially now that the fact that Brazil, there's no longer Lula or Dilma. Now you got Michael Temer, and in Argentina you no longer have Cristina. You don't have a Kirchner, you have Macri. You don't have Cristina Kirchner, you have Macri, and across Central America. I don't know if they were. I don't know if they were supposed to be in it. I think Central America. Some countries in there might have been included into there. Banco de Sur is the actual name of the bank that they were working on. UNASUR is the organization that they made. So Banco de Sur should have been up and running around this time. But, it kind of reminds me of like Gaddafi and his African Union over there. And, that he was trying to make Africa sovereign from banker influence. So the African Union would have been the replacement to all these neo-colonial banks and these banks that had been ripping off the African people for all that time. The bankers that had exploited Africans for hundreds of years. Africa, South America, in many ways it's very similar, as they're both the third world. They're both two third world continents, and it goes back to the plan for the elites for the third world. And when it comes to the people of the third world, you saw what David Rockefeller said. Is that David Rockefeller said that the plan for what the third world should be focused on is depopulation. That's what they want to do to the third world, and it's what they want to do to the world in general. Is to depopulate. And they're doing it, it sounds like a crackpot conspiracy theory to people that don't know a little bit about who these elites are and what they're striving for, which is a haven for all around the world for where they have total domination. But depopulation, they do it softly for the most part, and that's fluoride in the water, and I would say GMOs is part of it, the over-vaccination of our children, and people would probably say right now, oh, here comes one of the anti-vaccine nut jobs. It's like, don't you want polio to make a comeback? And here's what I got to say to that, is that I'm not against vaccination as a concept in general, but why do this is what I've seen is that and I don't know how factual this is, but the FDA. Again, I don't know how factual this is, but I'm going to say is that the FDA says that they have 2 parts per billion of mercury. It's supposed to be what's allowed in the water. One vaccine has 51,000 parts per billion, and if you saw like the FDA chart, I mean, isn't it like some ridiculous amount of what you're supposed to have by the time you're like 8 years old or something like that? It's ridiculous. That's at least what I've seen. I don't, but that's why the vaccination thing is one of the things I don't know enough about to tell you right here that vaccines are 100% bad for you and you should avoid them. But I'll tell you one thing is you should definitely read that insert every time. And also, I heard that you can ask the doctor to sign off, and that pretty much says that he claims responsibility for whatever adverse reactions happens. And apparently, if you ask for that, he can't give you the vaccine if he doesn't sign for it. And I heard a friend tell me about that, and they didn't give the vaccine because he wouldn't sign for it. Because there's that slight chance that there could be an adverse reaction with the flu shot or whatever. But the slight chance is it really worth it, for the flu, not getting the flu. I mean, these, of having potentially a fatal allergic reaction or whatnot. Again, don't take what I say as the fact. Just this is some of the information that I've came across, and I did a radio show a long time ago where we were talking about this, and but that's some of the ways that the depopulation I've seen. The GMOs, though, I know enough to tell you those are terrible, and that's part of their depopulation tactics. And the fluoride in the water, same thing. And there's also other reasons why, such as dumbing down the population, as fluoride's been shown to drop IQ, and also that fluoride. Actually, that's the main reason. Fluoride makes people docile, though. It was used in the water in the concentration camps, is what I've heard in Nazi Germany. What was I going to say? The other way to do depopulation, of course, is the not so soft way, which is via wars that they initiate, the elites initiate, and also, the genocides. Like potentially in the future, whatever happens when they start rounding up dissidents and whatnot, which is not a conspiracy theory. Just look into the bills and you see that they talk about this. The FEMA camps are very real. And they've already been built. So, they have the soft ways, and then they have the violent ways of depopulation. But depopulation is very real. That's why, when talk about these elites, talk about these people actually in charge. That's why it's important sometimes to remind people that it's not, just some the winners of these little standoffs between, for example, Russia, United States, or Venezuela and the United States, or whatever. It doesn't come down to like one team wins, the other team doesn't. It's the difference between absolutely heinous, horrible individuals that strive for nothing but power, money, greed, and all kinds of nefarious purposes, versus people that actually fight for the people. And Hugo Chavez was somebody that stood up to these horrible individuals that are the New World Order. And we're going to continue this show next week about Hugo Chavez. We're going to do a part 2 because I feel like we were not properly honoring him with just this little 2-hour show that I did today.
One and no return, and nobody can stop it. Malcolm Little, when he knelt before Elijah Muhammad, the comet that killed the dinosaurs, changing the earth. They love to criticize, they always say I changed for the worse. Like prescription pills when you misusing them, nigga. The Templar Knights when they took Jerusalem, nigga, and figured out what was buried under Solomon's temple. Al-Aqsa, the name is not coincidental. I know too much, the government is trying to murder me. No coming back like cutting your wrist ripped open vertically. How could the serpent be purposely put in charge of the country? Genetic engineered sickness spread amongst me. My people are so hungry that they attack without reason, like a fucking dog ripping off the hand that feeds them. Immortal technique is treason to the Patriot Act. So come and get me, motherfucker, cause I'm not coming back. This is the point from which I can never return, and if I back down now